Hey, what's up, humans? Welcome back to Mass Effect Revelation. This is Chapter 18. Chapter 18. We're almost there, Lieutenant Sanders, the driver told her, shouting to be heard above the engine of the six-wheeled armored personnel carrier as it bounced along the hard-packed desert sand outside Had'Dah. Just a few more clicks to the rendezvous site. In addition to the driver, 5 other Alliance Marines rode in the APC with her. A security detail pulled together at the last minute to protect her until she was off-world. She and the driver sat up front. The rest of the crew were huddled together in the back. 4 of the Marines had already been on Kamala when the orders came. The other 2 had arrived from Elysium the previous night in response to the instructions issued from the Alliance HQ. Their vehicle was Batarian, loaned to the Alliance by local authorities at the request of the Council. It was all part of the deal the Ambassador had worked out to get her safely off Kamala and back to Alliance territory. The engine whined as they climbed one of the immense sand dunes that stretched across the landscape out beyond the horizon toward the setting sun. In another 20 minutes it would be dark, but by then she'd already be aboard the Alliance frigate coming to pick her up. I'm surprised the Batarians agreed to this, the driver shouted again, making conversation. They don't normally authorize landings outside the spaceports, especially not for Alliance vessels. She understood his curiosity. He knew something big was going on, but his orders were simply to drive her out to the pickup. He had no way of knowing about her connection to Sidon, and nobody had told him about the shady backroom deals Ambassador Goyle must have made with the Council to make this happen. Kahlee stayed silent. She sure as hell wasn't about to fill him in. She wondered how much the Alliance had given up in exchange for this concession. What kind of bargain had they struck? Anderson probably had some idea, but he had barely said a dozen words to her in the 2 days following her admission in the hotel room. Not that she blamed him. He'd trusted her, and she'd used him, at least in his eyes. Kahlee knew all too well how much betrayal could sting, and now she was being whisked off to some unknown location for her protection, while Anderson was staying behind on Kamala to try and hunt down Dr. Qian. She thought a lot about trying to contact him again after all this was over. At first she'd been drawn to him out of need. She was scared and alone, and she had needed someone to cling to besides a gruff, prickly father whom she barely knew. But even though they'd only been together a few days, she got the sense that there was a chance they could have become more than just friends. Unfortunately, she doubted he'd want anything more to do with her now. Not after how she'd hurt him. The realization that she'd probably never see him again hit her harder than she would have ever expected. Hang on, ma'am, the driver suddenly called out, startling her from her molding thoughts as he wrenched the wheel and veered them sharply off course, nearly flipping the vehicle in the process. We've got company! From his perch on a rocky outcropping several kilometers away, Saren could just make out against the glare of the setting sun the silhouette of the APC carrying First Lieutenant Kahlee Sanders. When he'd received the mission update from the Citadel Council yesterday, he'd gone through the full spectrum of emotions. He began with outrage. They were ordering him to work with a human! And all because the Council felt it necessary to reward the Alliance for sharing information about the investigation into Sidon. Information Saren had already managed to figure out on his own. He knew Edan Had'Dah was behind the attack, but because he kept that information from the Citadel Council, he had to pretend to be grateful to the Alliance for handing it over to him. Now he had to allow one of the humans to work with him as he completed the mission. And not just any human, but that damnable Lieutenant Anderson, who kept interfering with his investigation. But as he had continued reading the update, his anger gave way to curiosity. He'd known about the Batarians' involvement, but not about the extraordinary alien technology referenced in the files recovered from Sedone. Though there were few details, it seems as if the artifact could be a relic dating all the way back to the Prothean extinction. Saren had always been intrigued by the sudden and unexplained disappearance of the Protheans. What kind of unimaginable string of events, what kind of catastrophic occurrence could cause an empire that spanned the known galaxy to vanish in less than a century? Virtually all traces of the Protheans had been wiped out, only the mass relays and Citadel survived, the enduring legacy of a once great people. Hundreds of explanations have been put forward, yet these were all nothing but theories and speculation. The truth about the Prothean extinction was still a mystery, and this ancient alien technology could be one of the keys to unraveling it. From what he could piece together from Qian's research notes, he suspected they had found some type of ship or orbiting space station, one with AI capabilities to self-monitor and even repair all its vital systems without the need for organic caretakers like the Keepers back on the Citadel. Delving deeper, it seemed the Doctor believed the discovery could one day be used to forge an alliance with the Geth, or possibly even control them. The implications were staggering. A massive army of synthetics, billions of troops whose absolute loyalty could be assured if one could somehow understand and influence their AI thought processes. Then, as he'd continue reading the file even further, his curiosity had transformed into cold, calculating satisfaction. Once he had learned the name of his quarry, the hardest part of his mission became locating Edan. He was probably cowering like an insect, burrowed into an underground bunker beneath one of the countless refineries spread across 1,000 square kilometers of rock and sand. Ferreting him out was going to be a long, grueling, time-consuming process. Or it would have been if he hadn't received the mission update from the Council. Included in the transmission were the details of the plan to evacuate Lieutenant Sanders from the world. Saren knew that Scar was still on Kamala. He'd had no reports of the big Krogan being sighted at the spaceports. He was probably holed up with Edan. And Edan had hired Scar to kill the young woman. Saren knew enough about Batarian culture to realize Edan wouldn't want to lose face by hiring someone who failed in their appointed task. If the opportunity presented itself, he'd send Scar after Sanders again. Saren had done his best to make sure that opportunity had presented itself. He knew Edan had spies in every level of government across Kamala, and particularly at the spaceports. All he'd done was make sure the Council's request for an unscheduled Alliance landing in the desert was logged in the official government records. The unusual request was sure to attract someone's attention. Inevitably, it would be reported up through the chain of underlings and lackeys to Edan himself, and Saren was confident the Batarian was smart enough to figure out who the Alliance was coming to pick up. The only flaw in the plan was that it was almost too obvious. If Edan suspected it was a trap, he wouldn't send anyone to respond to the message. Still watching the Alliance-driven APC through his long-range binoculars, Saren saw the vehicle swerve and nearly spin out as the driver began taking evasive action. Scanning the nearby dunes, he picked up the dust trails of 4 other vehicles closing in. Small, quick rovers with mounted guns converging on the slower APC from all sides. Edan had taken the bait. "God damn!" One of the Marines in the back shouted as a shell launched from one of the pursuing rovers exploded close enough to rock the APC's suspension. The driver was doing his frantic best to avoid the shells being lobbed at them by the enemy, sending the APC careening haphazardly over dunes and into small valleys to keep the other vehicles from getting a lock on their position. True to its name, the APC was heavily armored. Still, it was only a transport vehicle. It wasn't intended for combat. They had no mounted guns, and a thick plating on the body and undercarriage was intended to protect the occupants from sniper fire and landmines. Against anti-tank weapons, like those mounted on the pursuing rovers, the only purpose the armor served was to slow them down. In the back, one of the Marines was shouting into the radio, trying to warn the incoming Alliance frigate of their situation. "Mayday! Mayday! We are taking fire! The landing zone is hot! I repeat, the landing zone is hot! We got at least 4 of these bastards on our tail," the driver shouted back to him as the vehicle lurched and bounced over an outcropping of small rocks and boulders. "4 enemy rovers on sight," the radio man shouted. "Iwo Jima, are you reading?" "This is the Iwo Jima," a voice crackled back. "We read you, ground team. We're still 14 minutes out. Hold on." The radio operator slammed his fist against the heavily armored side of the vehicle in frustration. "We'll never last that long!" "You gotta outrun them," another one of the men yelled up to the front. "What the hell do you think I'm doing?" the driver snapped back at him. They flew over the top of another dune as a shell exploded just behind them, propelling the vehicle through the air for a full 10 meters before it crashed heavily back down to the ground. The high-impact shock absorbers took most of the blow, but even though Kahlee was securely belted in, the force of the landing still caused her to whack her head on the ceiling. The impact drove her teeth into her tongue, hard enough to make her taste blood. The men in the back fared much worse. Crammed into the vehicle, none of them were wearing safety belts. They were thrown from their seats, smashed against the roof, then hurled back down to the floor in a jumble of colliding elbows, knees, and skulls. Cries of surprise and grunts of pain were followed by a string of curse words directed at the driver. He ignored them, instead muttering, "They're too fast. We'll never outrun them," though Kahlee wasn't sure if he was talking to her or himself. His eyes were wide and wild, and she wondered how much longer he could keep it together. "You're doing great," Kahlee assured him. "Just keep us alive for a few more minutes. You can do it." The driver didn't respond, but only hunched forward, bringing himself closer to the wheel. Without warning, he pulled a 180-degree turn, hoping to surprise the enemy with a desperate and erratic maneuver. The momentum of the APC spun them out of control, nearly causing them to roll. For a split second, the vehicle teetered precariously, balancing over the wheels along one side before slamming back down with another hard jolt. With all 6 wheels back on the ground, the driver slammed his foot onto the accelerator, and they took off again, spewing a plume of pebbles, dust, and sand out behind them. From her seat in the front, Kahlee could now see the enemy clearly. 2 of their vehicles were spread wide, trying to outrace the APC and cut them off. The other 2 had originally fallen in behind them, firing at them with their mounted cannons as they steadily gained on their prey. With the sudden change of direction, however, the Alliance soldiers were now heading directly toward their former pursuers. "You bastards ever played chicken?" the driver screamed, never taking his foot off the gas as he steered the slower but much heavier APC head-on into one of the lightly armored rovers. Strapped securely into her seat, Kahlee had no chance to stop what was about to happen. The distance between the vehicles was gobbled up in an instant, and all she could do was brace for impact. At the last second, the smaller rover tried to veer off, but it was too late, and the collision was unavoidable. The blunted nose of the APC slammed into the front left side of the oncoming rover as it tried to peel away from the crash, a glancing blow instead of a direct hit, but at a combined speed of nearly 200 kilometers an hour, a glancing blow was more than enough. The enemy rover practically disintegrated. The force of the impact blew the frame apart. The axles snapped and the tires flew off. The enemy rover practically disintegrated. The force of the impact blew the frame apart. The axles snapped and the tires flew off. The doors sheared loose. Unidentifiable chunks of metal rent asunder and went flying and skipping across the sand. The fuel tank ruptured, sparked, and exploded. engulfing what was left of the rover's body in flames, reducing it to a molten slag heap. The driver, who had died in the first millisecond of the collision, was consumed by a great ball of tumbling fire that finally rolled to a stop hundreds of meters later. The other occupants had all been thrown free on impact, their bodies sent whirling and skipping across the ground at over 100 kilometers an hour. Limbs cracked and shattered, necks and spines snapped, skulls were caved in. Huge chunks of flesh were ripped from the bones of the corpses as they skidded across the sharp pebbles and abrasive sand. The sturdier APC held together on impact, though the entire front crumpled in like an accordion, deflecting off the enemy rover. They flipped and rolled half a dozen times before coming to rest upside down. Kahlee was barely conscious, stunned by the impact and disorientated by the blood rushing to her head. She felt someone fumbling at her seatbelt. Instinctively, she tried to fight them off, then heard a human voice shouting at her to calm down. She tried to concentrate. The vehicle wasn't moving anymore, but her world continued to spin. The driver was still belted in beside her. The steering wheel had snapped off and the jagged end of the steering column had been driven back into his chest, impaling him. His dead eyes were open wide, the glassy pupils fixed in a frozen stare that seemed directed accusingly at her. She realized she must have blacked out for a few seconds. One of the Marines from the back was outside the vehicle now, reaching in through the shattered window to try and unbuckle her seatbelt. She stopped fighting against him and instead reached out with her hands, pressing them firmly against the inverted roof so she wouldn't fall and hit her head the instant she was loose. A second later, the buckle detached. She managed to keep her head from slamming to the ground, though she did bang one of her knees painfully on the mangled dashboard as she fell. Strong hands seized her arms and pulled her to freedom through the gaping hole that had once been filled with tempered glass. Now that she was upright, the excess of blood rushed away from Kahlee's head, allowing her world to slowly come back into focus. Miraculously, the Marines in the back of the APC had all survived. The 5 of them and Kahlee were now huddled in the shadow of their overturned vehicle, temporarily using it for cover. She could hear the sound of gunfire. It wasn't the heavy thunk-thunk-thunk of anti-tank weapons, but rather the sharp rat-tat-tat-tat she recognized as bursts from an assault rifle. She could hear the metal pings as bullets ricocheted off the armor-plated rover that hid them from the enemy's sight. Kahlee didn't even have a pistol on her, but the Marines had recovered their weapons from the crash. Unfortunately, they were pinned down by a steady stream of enemy rounds, unable to use them. Given the consistent barrage of enemy bullets, even a split second of exposure to try and return fire was too great a risk. "Why aren't we using their cannons?" Kahlee shouted, her voice almost drowned out by the sounds of battle. "They must want to take us alive," one of the Marines replied, giving her a look that made it clear they all knew the enemy was only concerned with the survival of one specific person. "They're trying to flank us," another Marine shouted, pointing off at the horizon. One of the rovers had sped off in the distance, so far away it was barely visible. It was circling around behind them in a wide, looping arc, well beyond the range of the Marines' automatic weapons. Kahlee's attention was pulled away from the rover by a deafening roar from above, the unmistakable sound of a space vessel's drive core engines burning in the atmosphere. Turning her attention upwards, she saw a small ship swooping down from the sky. "It's the Iwo Jima!" one of the Marines cried out. The ship was moving fast, diving straight for the lone rover trying to flank them. Less than 50 meters from the ground, it pulled up sharply and opened fire. A single well-targeted blast from the ship's Guardian defense lasers turned the rover into scrap metal. The Iwo Jima banked and changed directions, its trajectory bringing it straight toward the 2 surviving rovers as the Marines let loose with spontaneous, exultant cheers. The cavalry had arrived. Scar had seen the frigate approaching long before it fired the lethal volley that took out the first of the Blue Sun's rovers. Its arrival was an inconvenient, but not unanticipated event. Moving with a quick but calm sense of purpose, he leapt out of his own rover and started shouting orders. Following his commands, the mercs quickly unloaded and assembled the portable mass accelerator cannon they'd stashed in the back of the vehicle. While the Alliance frigate fired its lasers on the defenseless rovers, Scar was arming the weapon, loading an ammo packet filled with hundreds of small explosive rounds. As the frigate banked toward them in a long, sweeping arc, he adjusted the aim and locked in on his target. And when he heard the cheers from the Marines hiding behind the overturned APC, he fired. The Guardian laser systems of the Iwo Jima, programmed to target and destroy incoming missiles, were overwhelmed by the sheer number of hypervelocity rounds fired at point-blank range. Normally, the deadly projectiles would have deflected harmlessly off the ship's kinetic barriers, but in order for a spacefaring vessel to touch down on a planet's surface and pick up a shore party, the barriers had to be shut down. As Scar had suspected, the Iwo Jima hadn't had time to reactivate them yet. Hundreds of tiny explosive shells impacted the ship's exterior, shearing fist-sized holes in the hull as they detonated. The personnel on board were shredded by the sudden storm of burning shrapnel ricocheting around the interior of the vessel. The Iwo Jima veered out of control and crushed into the ground, disintegrating in a fiery explosion. Huge chunks of shrapnel rained down all around them, sending the mercs scampering and diving for cover. Scar ignored the melting chunks of metal falling from the sky, instead slinging his assault rifle over one shoulder and marching out toward the overturned APC. He headed straight at it, knowing the Alliance soldiers on the other side wouldn't be able to see him coming. The vehicle providing them with cover was also obstructing their view of what was directly in front of them. As he approached the APC, the mercs behind him split out to the sides, triangulating their positions so they could keep firing around him. They kept a steady stream of deadly high-velocity rounds trained on the vehicle, keeping the Marines pinned down behind it. Ignoring the constant gunfire, the Krogan stopped less than 10 meters away from the APC. Every muscle in his body tensed as he began to focus his biotic abilities. The reaction triggered an automatic biofeedback response in the amplification modules surgically implanted throughout his nervous system. He began to gather dark energy, drawing it in and tapping it the way a black hole traps light. It took almost 10 full seconds for the power to build to maximum capacity. Then Scar thrust forward with a fist, hurling it toward his target. The overturned APC launched into the air, flying over the heads of the stunned Alliance Marines to land a dozen meters behind them. They were caught off guard, completely surprised and totally exposed by the unexpected maneuver. Nothing in their training had prepared them for this. Uncertain how to react, they simply froze, a small group huddled together, crouching in the sand. They would have been gunned down right then, were it not for the fact that their enemy was just as surprised as they. The mercs had stopped shooting, watching in utter amazement as the Krogan Biotic had simply hurled the 4-ton APC out of the way.
"Throw down your weapons,"
Scar growled. The Marines complied, knowing the battle was lost. They slowly stood up and raised their hands above their head, letting their assault rifles fall to the ground. Knowing she had no other choice, Kahlee did the same. The Krogan stepped forward and seized her by the upper arm, squeezing so hard she let out a cry of pain. One of the Marines made half a move to help her, then pulled himself back. She was glad. He couldn't help her. No sense getting himself killed. While the mercs kept their weapons trained on their prisoners, Scar half-dragged, half-carried Kahlee over to one of the vehicles. He threw her into the back and then climbed in beside her.
"Kill them,"
he said to his men, nodding in the direction of the Alliance Marines. The sharp retorts of gunfire drowned out Kahlee's screams. Saren watched the entire scene unfold through his binoculars, never moving from his carefully chosen position. He was surprised when Scar didn't kill Sanders, instead taking her prisoner. Obviously, her connection to all this was more than he'd first realized, but it didn't really change anything. The mercs climbed into their vehicles and sped off into the dusk, switching on their lights to guide them through the gloom. Saren leapt down from his vantage point and ran over to the small scout rover he had parked nearby. The vehicle had been specially modified for stealth missions at night. The headlamps were equipped with dimming covers to disperse the illumination and angle it down toward the ground, creating a faint glow that would be enough to navigate by, but was barely visible from more than a kilometer away. In contrast, the high-powered beams of the other vehicles blazed like beacons in the darkness of the desert night. He'd easily be able to spot them from as far as 10 kilometers out. All he had to do was follow them, and they'd lead him right to wherever Edan was hiding. Thank you, humans, so much for joining me today for the reading of Chapter 18. Next time, obviously, we will be going through Chapter 19. And we have a few more chapters after that before the book will be completed and we can move on to the comics. I'll see you guys in the next episode of Mass Effect Revelation. See you, Starside. The driver didn't respond, but only hunched forward, bringing himself. He had to pretend to be grateful to the Alliance for handling it over to him. That's not handling. What kind of cat did that better the first time? He was probably cowering like an insect. Mayday! Mayday! We are taking fire! The landing zone is hot! I repeat, better than the first time. No, Andromeda. No. Stop. Sit. Lay down. Lay down. Lay down. Andromeda, I'm trying to voice act and you're getting in the way. Lay down. Lay down. Down there. Come on. Wasting my time. You bastards ever play chicken? The driver screamed, never taking his foot off the gas as he steered the slower but much. The door sheared loose. Unidentifiable chunks of metal. Oh my fucking god. I'm starting there. Given the constant barrage of enemy bullets to navigate by, oh my god. You can put multiple sentences into a paragraph, by the way. It's weird.